The billionaire froze outside the executive conference room when she saw her daughter sitting on the floor beside a janitor, surrounded by sheets of handwritten mathematics problems. Her 12-year-old daughter, who had failed every recent math test and cried whenever anyone mentioned numbers, was smiling for the first time in months. But the real shock came when the janitor reached over and solved an impossible-looking equation in seconds, then explained it with the precision of someone who had spent years calculating distances, angles, timing, and risk under pressure. The billionaire had assumed he was simply the quiet man who cleaned her office building. She had no idea he had once been a Navy SEAL trusted with missions where one wrong calculation could mean the difference between life and death. If you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change someone's life, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so our family can continue bringing you emotional stories about people who prove that a person's worth is never defined by a job title. Vivian Carlisle was a woman accustomed to solving problems with money. At 42, she controlled a technology and logistics empire valued at billions of dollars, traveled with a small security team, and had assistants who could arrange almost anything within hours. Her name appeared on business magazines and charity lists, but her greatest concern had nothing to do with her companies. It was her daughter, Elsie. At 12 years old, Elsie was intelligent, imaginative, and deeply sensitive, but mathematics had become a nightmare. Her grades had fallen dramatically after her father died 2 years earlier, and every attempt to improve them seemed to make things worse. Tutors came and went. Private schools recommended specialists. Educational consultants charged enormous fees. Vivian hired the most expensive mathematics tutor in the city, but Elsie refused to work with him after several weeks. Vivian interpreted the problem as stubbornness at first. She believed Elsie simply needed discipline. Then she began noticing small changes that frightened her. Elsie stopped raising her hand in class. She avoided homework. She became upset whenever she made mistakes. Eventually, she started saying that she was stupid. That sentence frightened Vivian more than any failing grade. Yet because Vivian was accustomed to solving problems quickly, she responded by trying to control everything around her. She changed tutors, changed schedules, and reduced distractions. She never realized that her daughter did not need another person telling her how to succeed. She needed someone to convince her that failure did not make her worthless. That person was a janitor named Brooks Callahan. Brooks was 41, quiet, disciplined, and almost invisible in the enormous headquarters of Carlisle Technologies. He arrived early each morning, completed his maintenance duties without complaint, and left after his shift. He wore an old but carefully cleaned uniform and drove a 12-year-old pickup truck. Most executives barely noticed him. Vivian had probably passed him dozens of times without remembering his face. But Brooks noticed everything. He noticed which employees stayed late. He noticed when someone was struggling. He noticed which elevator made an unusual sound. He noticed when Elsie walked through the lobby with her shoulders lowered and her school bag hanging from one hand. He also recognized numbers. Before becoming a janitor, Brooks had served for more than a decade as a Navy SEAL. His military career had involved navigation, reconnaissance, tactical planning, and operations that required extraordinary attention to detail. Mathematics had not simply been a school subject to him. It had been part of survival. Distance, speed, timing, angles, coordinates, fuel, trajectories, weather, and probability had all mattered. Yet Brooks never spoke about his military service unless someone specifically asked. After leaving the SEALs, he had struggled with civilian life. The structure he had depended on disappeared. Some of his closest friends were gone. Others returned with wounds they carried silently. Brooks had eventually realized that he wanted a simple life. He took maintenance work because it gave him predictable responsibilities and allowed him to keep his distance from attention. His greatest responsibility was his 8-year-old son, Archie. Archie had been born with a heart condition that required frequent medical appointments. Brooks was a devoted father, but medical expenses had consumed much of his savings. He could have pursued higher-paying security positions, but many required travel, long hours, and responsibilities that would keep him away from his son. So he chose the quieter job. Nobody at Carlisle Technologies knew the full story. One afternoon, Brooks found Elsie sitting alone in a conference room hallway with a mathematics workbook open on her lap. She was staring at a problem without writing anything. Her eyes were red. Brooks recognized the expression immediately. It was the look of someone who had convinced herself that trying would only lead to another failure. He did not tell her the answer. Instead, he sat several feet away and began working on his own paperwork. Elsie eventually glanced at him. Brooks noticed that she was struggling with fractions and ratios. He explained the concept using something she understood, music. He showed her how rhythm could be divided into smaller pieces and how numbers could describe patterns. She listened. That was the beginning. The next afternoon, Elsie returned. Brooks helped her again. Soon, their informal lessons became a secret routine. Elsie would finish school and sometimes wait in an unused conference room while Brooks completed his cleaning duties nearby. He never accepted money. He never asked Vivian for permission because he was afraid she would misunderstand his intentions. He simply wanted to help a child who had begun believing that she could not learn. Brooks changed the way Elsie looked at mathematics. He stopped treating problems as tests of intelligence and started treating them as puzzles. He taught her to break large problems into smaller ones. He showed her that mistakes were information, not proof of failure. Whenever she became frustrated, he made her start with something she knew before moving forward. Her grades began improving. More importantly, her confidence returned. Vivian noticed that change but could not explain it. She assumed the private tutor had finally succeeded. Then one afternoon, she arrived at the office unexpectedly early. As she walked toward her executive suite, she heard laughter coming from an empty conference room. She opened the door. There was Elsie, sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by papers. Brooks sat beside her, drawing a geometric diagram on a whiteboard. The janitor was explaining how a triangle could be understood through angles and relationships rather than memorized formulas. Vivian's face hardened. She immediately assumed the worst. She demanded to know why a janitor was secretly tutoring her daughter. Elsie immediately became frightened. She expected her mother to be angry with her. Brooks stood and calmly explained that he had been helping Elsie because she was struggling. He admitted that he had not asked permission and apologized. Vivian dismissed him from the room and told him to return to his duties. Elsie burst into tears. She told her mother that Brooks was the only person who had made her feel intelligent again. Vivian was stunned. She had spent a fortune trying to help her daughter, yet her daughter believed a janitor had done more for her than all the expensive specialists combined. Vivian ordered a background check. The results arrived the following morning. Brooks Callahan had not always been a janitor. His military records revealed years of service as a Navy SEAL. He had received commendations for missions involving navigation, reconnaissance, and rescue operations. His service record contained details that were partly classified, but what was available showed a remarkable career. He had been trusted with responsibilities that required extraordinary precision. Vivian could not understand why someone with that background was cleaning floors in her company. Then she discovered the medical records connected to his son. Archie's heart condition required ongoing treatment. Brooks had chosen stable employment so he could remain available for his child. He had declined several opportunities that would have paid significantly more because they would have demanded travel. Vivian felt ashamed. She had judged Brooks by his uniform. She had assumed his job reflected his ability. She had forgotten that a person could be extraordinary and still choose a humble life. But the greatest surprise was still waiting. Vivian later discovered that Brooks had used the same mathematical techniques he had learned during military training to help Elsie understand concepts her tutors had failed to explain. He had not been showing off. He had simply translated difficult ideas into practical examples. One afternoon, Vivian watched from the hallway as Brooks helped Elsie solve a complicated problem. Elsie made a mistake. Instead of becoming upset, she laughed and tried again. Vivian realized that was the real achievement. Her daughter was no longer afraid of being wrong. Vivian finally understood that she had spent years trying to make Elsie successful because she was terrified that her daughter's struggles reflected badly on the family. She had turned education into another measurement of worth. Without realizing it, she had made her daughter believe that love depended on achievement. She apologized. Not casually. Not with money. She sat beside Elsie and admitted that she had been wrong. She told her daughter that she did not need perfect grades to deserve love. She admitted that losing Elsie's father had made her afraid of losing anyone else, and that fear had made her controlling. Elsie cried and hugged her. Then Vivian turned toward Brooks. She apologized to him too. Brooks accepted the apology, but he explained that he had not expected gratitude. He had simply seen a child who needed someone to believe in her. That statement stayed with Vivian. She offered Brooks a better position within the company, but he hesitated. He did not want charity. He wanted to earn his place. So Vivian made him a different offer. She asked him to help create an educational program for children of military families and underprivileged students, using practical mathematics and problem-solving skills to build confidence. Brooks agreed. The program became one of the most successful projects Carlisle Technologies had ever funded. But the most meaningful success happened inside one classroom. Elsie eventually entered a regional mathematics competition. Vivian expected her to be nervous. Instead, Elsie walked into the competition carrying a notebook filled with Brooks's simple diagrams and problem-solving strategies. She did not win first place. She finished third. And she was absolutely thrilled. When she came home, she did not apologize for not winning. She ran to her mother and proudly showed her the certificate. Vivian smiled through tears. For the first time, she understood that third place could be a victory. Brooks was there too, standing quietly near the doorway. Elsie hugged him. Archie joined them. The four of them stood together, not as billionaire, janitor, former SEAL, or struggling child, but simply as people who had helped one another become stronger. Months later, Vivian visited the classroom of the Foundation's new education program. She watched Brooks teach a group of children how to solve a complicated problem by breaking it into simple pieces. One child raised a hand and made a mistake. Brooks smiled. Instead of correcting him immediately, he encouraged him to look at the problem again. Vivian watched the child's expression change from embarrassment to determination. She realized that was what Brooks had given Elsie. Not mathematics. Courage. The former SEAL had survived dangerous missions, grief, and the difficult transition into civilian life. Yet his most important mission had turned out to be something completely different. He had helped one little girl stop believing that a mistake made her stupid. And in doing so, he had changed her mother too. Years later, Elsie would become fascinated with engineering and mathematics. She would eventually help expand the foundation Brooks had started. She never forgot the janitor who once sat beside her on a hallway floor and showed her that numbers were not enemies. Brooks never forgot her either. Whenever people praised him for his military service, he would think about something much simpler. A 12-year-old girl who once cried over fractions and later stood proudly in front of a classroom explaining equations to other children. Before we reach the final moment, leave a meaningful comment and tell us what you believe the greatest lesson of this story is. Is success about being the smartest person in the room, or is it about having someone who believes in you when you no longer believe in yourself? Your comment could give hope to someone struggling with failure today. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Because Vivian learned that day that a person's value cannot be measured by a title, a paycheck, or a uniform. The man she had seen as a janitor had once carried the responsibility of protecting lives as a Navy SEAL, but his greatest impact came from something far quieter. He saw a frightened child sitting behind a difficult problem and refused to let her believe she was incapable. And Elsie learned something she would carry for the rest of her life. Sometimes the person who changes your future is not the person with the biggest office, the most expensive degree, or the most impressive reputation. Sometimes it is the person who sits beside you when you are ready to give up and patiently helps you try one more time. That afternoon, Vivian had walked into a conference room expecting to find a janitor crossing a boundary. Instead, she discovered a teacher. She discovered a hero. And most importantly, she discovered that the daughter she had been trying so desperately to protect did not need a perfect life. She simply needed someone to believe she was strong enough to live it.